Furthermore, people regularly approach Jesus and ask him if he is God. When he responds that he is, they ask him questions, to which he says, "I don't know, only the Father knows." Mark 13:32, my paraphrase. What? He claims to be God, who knows everything and made everything, and yet he doesn't know stuff? Why not take this out of the account? Take out the idea that Jesus could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people. Mark 6:5. What do you mean, could not? He's God. He can do whatever he wants, can't he? All of this is counterproductive to any agenda of power and making Jesus look like the perfect hero. But alas, it is present. Peter and the other disciples look terrible in these stories. Peter is always making mistakes, saying the wrong thing, and even looking blasphemous. One minute he basically says, "I'll go to the death before I deny you, Jesus." See Mark 14:31. And then hours later, he denies Jesus and runs away. Chapter 14, verses 66 through 68. Similarly, James and John begged to sit at Jesus' right and left in his kingdom. Mark 10:37. Looking like conniving, power-hungry children whom Jesus then rebukes. These pillars of the early church disobey, ask the wrong questions, teach the wrong things, lack faith, and over again show themselves to not be men of valor. Why? Because the gospel writers are saying, this is just what happened, and instead of cleaning up the accounts, they left them as they were. Cultural trust. Slaves, women, and polygamists. Skeptics also point out the cultural disconnect between the modern world and the Bible, arguing that the Bible is culturally regressive in a way that people shouldn't accept. People argue that it is pro-slavery and misogynistic. So is there a way to approach the Bible that engenders trust for what it says, even in modern times? First, Timothy Keller says, when we read the passages that grate against us, we need to consider that the Bible might not always be teaching what we think it's teaching. In other words, be slow to judge something from another time and culture until you are sure you understand what it is saying in context. Take the common objection that the Bible teaches slavery, because Paul says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters." Colossians 3:22. From this one phrase, we could conclude that Paul and all other Christians affirm and support slavery, but this is anachronistic. When North Americans hear the word slave, we typically think of the African slave trade, in which an owner could beat his slave, kill him, basically do whatever he wanted with the slave and the slave's family. But was this the norm in the Roman Empire of the 1st century? Historians tell us that 1st century Roman slavery wasn't like that at all. Slaves were not identified by race, and they weren't owned in the same way that African slaves were owned in the Americas. They weren't segregated from society, killed on a whim, or tortured. In fact, 85 to 90% of the inhabitants of Rome and Italy were slaves, or of slave origin, in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. The slaves enjoyed great popularity in Rome. They were the trusted household servants, teachers, librarians, accountants, and estate managers. Because slavery was a form of employment, one could work his or her way out of it in 10 or 15 years. Essentially, what Paul is advising slaves in this passage is that they work hard and respect their superiors. He's not saying that it is good to own another human being or that slavery itself is a good thing. Let's say we threw the Bible aside because we didn't like what we thought it said about slavery. If we did this, we would be rejecting Christianity based on something we didn't understand. A wrong assumption. We would be denouncing Jesus out of our own ignorance by assuming the Bible's use of a certain word is the same as how we use it today. I made this mistake a few years ago when I sat down and read the book of Genesis in 2 sittings for a class I was taking. It was an invigorating experience, but I struggled as I read about the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. I was offended by their treatment